All right, welcome everybody here. We are at CivicTechYYC for April 11th here of 2023. The event we've got going on this evening is Designing for Compassion with Universal Design. We're hosting Barry Pendergast, and we're having our open discussion here about aspects of universal design from some of the industries from his experience, as well as possibly yours in the audience there, and considering compassion in all areas of that design process. Barry is a retired architect who's passionate about rethinking on how technologies can be harnessed. His experience includes working from the early ideas of fully electronic architectural projects with Apple Canada in the mid 1980s to experiments with 3D photography at the start of investigating virtual reality in 2016, using some of the early Oculus headsets with a local group of children on the autism spectrum and those who live with Aspergers. Barry's current ambition is to use what he's learned to support projects to promote VR among seniors. In 2021, Barry posed that idea to UBC to equip a number of seniors with VR headsets and connections to students in faculties of the computer science arts working together to explore the VR concepts of the metaverse. And there's a whole bunch more that Barry has that he'll go through in the presentation. I had a long summary on Meetup that is also a shortened up version of it. So I have no idea how long your actual CV would be, Barry, if we were to try and go through everything. Land acknowledgement just for this evening. Civic Tech is an organization resides on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 here in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, Stoney Nakoda First Nations tribes of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. And this is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Civic Tech is a group that is focused on the use of technology for public good, where you use data to design and address challenges that citizens and governments are facing, helping those citizens and governments work together to use that technology in data and design together, pursue those opportunities for greater citizen engagement and more effective services, as well as grow public engagement, enhancing digital services in ways that are more inclusive, responsive, innovative, open, and citizen-centered. Civic Tech is a global movement. We have expanded from a small bit here in Canada all the way across the country, and it's all held underneath the Code for All umbrella. In the US, there are other cities like Chicago, Boston, and New York City that have led the civic tech movement, with other organizations such as Code for America, US Digital Service, and 18F. And there's other civic tech organizations like I mentioned in Canada. So we got Civic Tech Toronto, Beta YEG, Civic Tech Ottawa City. There's a number of other ones, and we all meet on a regular basis to collaborate across the country. Launching Civic Tech here in Calgary, it was launched in 2017, bringing people together who had an interest in community and technology, leveraging support of the City of Calgary and the Rainforest Alberta Network, focusing on breaking down barriers and those sector silos for better collaboration, as well as addressing challenges and the opportunities of citizens and government. Civic Tech sits in the tech for good space, so you can kind of see all the different areas that we're part of here as well. Civic Tech just sits up here. And then we've also got community tech, maker spaces, place for tech, open data, digital rights, digital transformation, and it all kind of bubbles up and comes together there. When we look at data in the social sector, the amount of data is increasing and organizations need to be able to leverage the power of that data for decision making. Many of us lack the skills and resources to collect and understand and use that data, and data professionals with knowledge and skills want to become more engaged. And here we allow people to be able to produce those volunteer projects and get more engaged with one another. All of that comes in together with the knowledge pyramid, which we start out with data as our foundation and work up our way through information, knowledge, and finally wisdom. Here within Civic Tech, we've had some major projects. Kind of some of the main ones that have been recently or on the go is there's the BudLib project, which is a library database management project. We've run some blockchain experiments, and Alice Lamb has her Volley volunteering app. We've also got civic user testing groups that started up last year. They're grassroots groups that facilitate better and more inclusive, accessible usability testing that engages residents in the creation of technology that's meant to serve them. The concept started out as in Chicago and spread across cities, including Toronto and now Calgary, with the one which is called Inclusity. So we started Inclusity Calgary. You can find it at inclusitycalgary.ca. We're a team of technologists, designers, public employees, community organizers, entrepreneurs, policy analysts, and other engaged citizens that all share a vision that Calgary can be more accessible for all. Our mission is to plan, design, and run testing sessions with inclusive and representative groups of Calgarians to improve the usability of products, processes, and services for teams in public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. We're proudly supported by the Calgary Foundation, and it was created in partnership between CivicTechYYC here and Calgary UX. And then just some of the partner groups and organizations we work with here. There's Code for Canada, who I mentioned, Calgary UX, who we partnered with on a few projects, Data for Good, which is a parallel organization, Rainforest that helped found us. There's also the YYC Data Society that we work with regularly, Platform Calgary, and for immigrants in tech, there's Immigrant Techies Alberta. And if you want to get connected with our socials, got them all up there. That's all my presentation deck, and now I can hand it off to Barry. Barry, you've got yours you wanted to get shared there?
Yeah, so I really appreciate this chance to connect with you guys. It just seems in the past year, I've managed through a number of connections to get more and more connected in the Calgary area, which is rather nice because it seemed to be lonely in the beginning. Just a little bit about some of my architectural work. I did a lot of housing as an architect, trying to do original things with even very low cost housing. Was involved with the design of Sheriff King, which was kind of an interesting journey because originally it was in Elbow Park where a lot of community opposition to the project, and it was rather nice eventually to have it built in Inglewood, which is where I've done a lot of my work in the past. You know, a very caring community. And then a lot of the housing, trying to do different things with fairly traditional forms, but then doing crazy things like a World Fair many years ago, trying to come up with very different kinds of ideas using a lot of 3D modeling in the early stages, which I'm finding really useful as I get it more into the metaverse stuff. And then a project which I'm really quite excited about. I was a founding member of Horizon Housing Society, and this building as a high rise and a low rise, but it was designed really very much with Canadian mental health. Canadian mental health wanted to form a housing division, and I helped form that in the beginning. And in this building, we were actually bringing people from, at that time, even from Panoka, at that time, where they were literally being forced out of Panoka into the community. But the other thing I wanted to do, and this is just a section through the building where, I don't know whether you can see it there, the sort of slightly pink color is one apartment, the slightly yellowy green is another apartment, just a level apartment, and then there's another apartment goes under the corridor. So the idea is to minimize the number of corridors in the building. Every apartment has a two means of fire escape. All the units have access to the southern environment. And really, it was quite exciting doing something completely different. I think so often you can tell even from the elevation there in the lower right-hand corner, it looks quite different. And it almost feels like you're in townhouses when you enter into almost like a split level townhouse. You go up into a bedroom space and then you come up into your living room, or you go into a bedroom space and come down into your living room, or if you're a senior or a disabled person, you can go straight into the unit there. So, so very much of my recent years has been this whole idea of how the heck do you deal with growing old and still staying active? And so that's a lot of the time it's a lot of fun, but also it's also full of major challenges for many people. So why do I do this? It's because 90% of Canadian seniors want to age in place and not be forced into long-term care. In fact, I say it's going to take it's going to take me kicking and screaming if they want to put me into one of the warehouses that we're tending to design in Canada. only 25% of us think we'll actually be able to age in place, and I will talk a little bit about that. And then really, what does age in place mean? It's really quite simple. I want to stay in the house or community that I'm familiar with, where I know where things are, and also I want to have these services that I deserve from a medical standpoint. And then when you start to think that in 2000, well, this year, in fact, baby boomers are turning 77. That should be slightly scary in a way. And then by 2025, there'll be more over 65 than those under 15. And this last stat, that there are countries where there are more adult diapers sold than for infants. That should bring it into perspective. So what are the things we learn when we study countries around the world that are the happiest and the ones where people live the longest? And it's basically, it all comes down to social integration. Is how do we have a happy, healthy social integration and close relationships? All the other things, even like exercise and so on, are not so critical as that whole social integration. And then if we look at what has happened now in the last few years with COVID, I mean, I won't go through every part of this, but actually Canada had one of the worst records of deaths in long-term care in the world. And that's because we've tended to herd people into these large complexes, which really nobody wants to go into if they've got any sense. And you've got to spend something like $7,000 a month for the benefit going into them. And that there are other solutions. And then the whole question of staffing. Staffing has been a horrendous problem, which is one of the reasons we had so many deaths. We had over 18,000 deaths in long-term care facilities in Canadian long-term care. And that is really not a very nice record to have on our conscience. And then I think the whole question of what has happened internationally with the Ukraine and Russia, really, it's so heartbreaking to see what is going on there, but it's had a huge impact on all of our lives. You know, getting down to things like grocery prices and other things which are forcing us to borrow money when we probably least want to be able to do it. Many of us as seniors are actually, we're relatively asset rich because we own our houses, but I'm afraid from cash availability, we just don't have that kind of ability to earn income, because either we've been through ages and we've been laid off from doing what we love doing and we're capable of doing, or for a number of other reasons. So again, we want to age in place. This is a house that my wife and I live in now, right on the edge of Glenmore Reservoir. It is a different kind of house. We were fortunate to have the chance to design our own home. And in fact, we've designed 2 homes in our marriage, which is kind of surprising. We're still married, having gone through that experience. Having a wife who's married to an architect isn't the easiest thing. And I won't tell you some of the things she said about the architect that she sleeps with, but generally we've enjoyed doing that. And our house in Britain was completely different as well. So that's the inside of it, a very woodsy kind of house, a spiral staircase, which we're actually finding is actually quite easy to get up and down in our old age. But it's very light. We have 8 skylights, and certainly in the last 10 years, none of them have leaked because we started to put them in properly and pay proper prices for doing it. But we still like the woodsy feel to the house. And essentially, it's a 2-bed bungalow on the main level where our teenage children resided, and we have like a big loft on the upper level. And we really like that. So really, it is it's a bungalow with a loft over the top, which would make conversion to using it for, as we get more incapable of maybe climbing stairs, a lot more bearable. And the house is designed around a rear courtyard. Our house in Britain actually was a complete courtyard in the middle of the house, which we really liked. And it seems so sad that so many, and probably the majority of people, never get a chance to design a house around what they want to do. But we've had the chance to do it twice, and we've really enjoyed that process. And here's the courtyard on the outside, a lot of private space. So one of the things that we started to look at about aging in place was how do we do that? And we actually came across a concept out of the States, which is called the Village to Village Network. And there are now nearly 300 villages in the US, which essentially look after the whole process of aging in place. And they have all the services that you need. They have the socialization. And it all started in Boston in 2002 in Beacon Hill. And it's become incredibly good, a good way of getting people to work together, to help each other, to come alongside each other, and to not only deal with the issues of just socialization. I'll talk about it later, but the whole question of how do we come alongside people who are going through really, really difficult times in that old age. So I won't go through all of these, but it's all of the issues that really that we're used to when we look at villages elsewhere. We want to have those kinds of things. And the average price in the US is somewhere in Canadian dollars, about $1,700 a year. You get access to staff and navigation to all the services that you want. So we started actually our first test of this in 2018. We actually delivered invites to 1,500 homes. And our first meeting, you can see it there, we had 62 people turn up. So we knew we had something that people wanted. It wasn't happening in our community. We didn't have a lot of things that were devoted to seniors activities or the plus 55 crowd. So we were pretty pleased. And then we started getting interest of almost all the players in long-term care or seniors activities in Calgary. So it certainly introduced me to all of the people like the Kirby Centre, Ogden, Beaucliffe, and so on. A bunch of researchers. We had Haskane do business studies for us, and then Agewell in Calgary. And yeah, it really means now that we've got access to almost every major player in this field. And then really coming on the topic that was posed partially to me tonight, and of course I knew about university design, but there are aspects to it that I didn't feel necessarily we consider, and it's that whole compassion level is how do we show compassion to the least capable in our society? Because believe me, there are, at the moment, I can think of at least a dozen couples or dozen individuals where we're trying to provide some kind of encouragement as they go through some major challenges in their senior years. So universal design, I think probably everybody is familiar. The idea is to really have buildings that will last a lifetime, from that early having young families with the strollers and things running through the house, but really making sure that the homes are capable of being used later on in our later years with wheelchair access and having enough provision for the adding of safety bars and things like that later on. But the challenge is that most of our homes, really, many of them are 2-story, 3-story, and really to actually implement that into existing homes is going to be very costly and quite difficult to do. And then the whole area, which was a shock when I came 51 years ago as a young architect, was we've got an incredibly inflexible land use and zoning regulations. It seems amazing that we've almost given up doing things which other cities have done well, because we're totally inflexible on the zoning side of it. And then really Calgary's fixation, and maybe Alberta's fixation, with single family housing, which is certainly a major challenge. And of course, there I am, I live in a single family house and I'm criticizing it, but to be honest, we waste so much land with 20-foot front yards. Like the one thing I did well was the designing around a courtyard, so we have privacy. And then I only have a 12-foot driveway. My attitude was the cars are either in the garage or they're being driven. Why we waste 20 feet or more to a driveway that people end up parking cars on or other junk doesn't seem to make any sense. Now, one of the projects that really has impressed me is what John Brown, the Dean of Architecture at the University of Calgary, has done, is the design of garden lofts. And this is my friend Elizabeth, who was has had, I think, probably the third that came off the production line. So it's really, and she actually can afford to put one of these in her yard. She still has access to a house, which she does own, but she's put this really as an experiment to see what it's like to live in. So she's now comparing the lived-in experience. She spent most of the winter in it. And here's the plan. They're very compact units. But what is nice in the unit is John has designed them so that you are not aware you're living in a handicap unit. In this case, one of the optional extras is the counters can all go up and down. The shower is fully accessible by somebody in a wheelchair, and yet it doesn't look like a handicap unit. It's a very nice environment to be in. The heating works really well, and it's very economical, judging by Elizabeth's early numbers that she's been able to share. So I'm really impressed by this whole idea of having literally a garden suite, because most of us have yards that are far too big and we're not using them anyway. So why the heck shouldn't we do it so that maybe even a refugee family or somebody, even a caregiver, can go into and look after us in our old age? And they've got a decent facility. All that we've got to do really with these units is bring down the price. I think Elizabeth's price is working out to about 450,000, which is really outside what most of us can afford to do. So whether we do this or we use container solutions, but I think what John has proved to us in a tight unit, relatively small floor space, he's come up with a very, very nicely considered design. So this is our own house, but showing how we could easily add a laneway suite because we've got plenty of space in the back. It would be accessed off the lane. And most people have got that space in their rear yards. Now, just turning to a couple of examples of friends who are going through the very, very difficult stage of their lives. Is, in this case, Elaine is looking after her husband, Nigel, who is, putting it simply, he's dying. And she has chosen, like many couples now, to look after their sick partner. And she's had to make some adaptations, like the ramp to the front door. And this is a unit that her son has actually built on the back, which is where Nigel spends most of his time. And currently, Elaine is looking, is going out and looking at hospices, and because that is a reality that sometime in the next month or so, it's likely that Nigel needs the extra care that would come in a hospice. But I can assure you, it's not very easy to find a hospice. And one of the things I think we've realized is that almost every one of us in these latter years of our life, we've got a solution that we have to look for ourselves. There's very little sharing of where to go for some of these answers. And it's something that, again, if we compare ourselves with other countries, we're not doing a very good job on that. The navigation is really tough. Now, for anybody who wants to know a little bit more about this whole challenge of us all going to probably into our 90s, Bradley Sherman, who actually spent a number of years with the American Association of Retired People, and he's written a wonderful book, Super Ager, and it really describes all of the facets and factors really in forcing people to give up their jobs in their 60s. It makes no sense at all. We lose all the skills and capabilities, and it's just an easy and excellent read. And then the whole question of, we thought that doing things like this made a lot of sense because, you know, people would come together and maybe in this case, it's a project on 90th Avenue. We've got friends who moved, they downsized into here, into the unit on the top right. And in the case of the couple, the husband is a very gregarious, he can strike up conversations with anybody. They have found it quite lonely being in this unit. So that socialization aspect, you can increase the density, but if you don't deal with the socialization aspect from the very beginning, you're in trouble. Now, the block on the back there is a new one, but we've got two friends now that we're working with in our community, but they live in there, and they have started a social group. They meet on the ground floor. They've actually spearheaded it themselves. Nobody else was going to do it for them. And it seems sad to me that we suddenly build these high rises thinking they're a solution to all our density problems, and they're only a partial solution. And then things like this, this is a little commercial center at the end of our road, but why the heck did we not use the rights above it to build housing? You know, we see it's very common in Vancouver, you do that. Why does the city planning not say, we want to put housing over units like this? It would obviously, you know, make a lot of sense to have access to commercial facilities, doctors, pharmacists, and other people right underneath you, literally. And then so many of our streets, this is our street, we're down at the bottom on the left-hand side, it's void of people most of the day. It's absolutely void. And I mean, it really is quite difficult to get people to socialize when they don't have contact with each other. And then in the wintertime, they're driving into a garage, and the garage door comes down and you're even more separated from your neighbors. And we've sort of got into that habit of not wanting to socialize. And then here's all the groups that can help me. Or sorry, this is probably 30% of all the groups that can help me as a senior. They're all competing, and they're all trying to outplay each other. But the idea of having one point of call, one place I can phone and ask for connection to help me with a particular problem, it's not there. And navigation is the essential one. And so I'm hoping that somehow we're going to see some changes in that. Now, the federal government finally maybe is getting some clue as to what they need to do. So they've got this 8-page questionnaire that they're sending out to seniors, or trying to get seniors across the country to fill in. I'm not certain that we're ever going to hear the results of this anytime soon. And what we're planning to do is use paper copies, and we're going to do a door-to-door survey with the people in our neighborhood. We're actually going to go door-to-door, rather like we did with that first invitation, and try and talk to people and try and work out how. We've got actually 1,200 seniors in our community, and we only really know about maybe not even 10%. So we want to be fairly out there, visible, tell them what we're trying to do. And sorry, I'm happy to pause with questions.
Yeah, Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, Barry, how did you find, I'm trying to remember the name of the group, but in the Oak Ridge Safeway Mall, there was a social facilitator, and I'm trying hard to remember her name as well, but that used to be fielded quite well, and then that money dried up, and I apologize for not remembering the name of either the lady or the organization, but very prevalent in Oak Ridge.
Yeah, Calgary Resource Society. And I'm embarrassed to say the lady helped us tremendously in the beginning. She allowed us to use her boardroom, and was a great supporter of what we were doing. So yes. Yeah, I agree with you. That kind of organization. And in fact, Gary Hurley, who was on the board there, Gary is very involved with Weaselhead, and he's now very involved with us in what we're doing. So he's got a lot of that knowledge, and he's very keen to see us have that kind of format. Yeah, really, in the sense of Calgary, there's very little in the terms of facilities to help us in navigating the systems, and everybody's competing with each other.
Right. Yeah, the competition part, and then getting the resources once again aligned under some facility so that people can go to a one-stop shop, if you will, to
Absolutely. I want to be able to pick up a phone and say, I've got this particular problem. What do I do?
Yeah. Thanks.
So it was interesting last year, Calgary sent apparently this letter out inviting me to go and talk to them about the budgets. And I thought they'd be, interested in hearing my presentation. So I only had 5 minutes, but I did go, and I talked about things like 15-minute cities. I spoke about different ways to deal with our land use and so on. And it's the first time in a long time where I've actually used a script to read from. I didn't like doing that. The mayor at least gave me a good presentation, and that was the best I got from the mayor. And my own ward councillor asked me some fairly innocuous questions that really didn't open anything up. And over 2 days of budget hearings, there was more time spent on bus services than anything else. And it was really sad to miss this opportunity. And I really feel if we're planning to find new communities in the city, and they're all going to be auto-dependent as most of the others are, we're missing the point of what we could be doing. So I won't go into a lot of the details on this, but Alzheimer's, dementia, looming crisis. In 2018, it was estimated 8% of the population was suffering with dementia. And by 2030, it's estimated there will be 16% of our population dealing with this. And that's ignoring the families that are impacted by it as well. So it's an enormous challenge. And I think a lot of my time in recent years has been devoted to trying to find solutions to help that, because we're not seeing a lot of really encouraging signs. Andre Picard is somebody who's worth reading if you don't know about him, but he's a really wonderful, he writes in the Globe and Mail, but he's devoted a lot of his energies to really what can we do better in our communities. And there was a whole seminar last year, which was mainly for bureaucrats across Canada. And one of the panels there said, quite openly, if long-term care, if communities and senior groups were doing a better job, 25% of long-term care residents could be accommodated in the community and the health facilities. And so that's rather, and I think they were being sort of fairly modest number. I think we could even do a better job than that. And then the sad truth is that, and I see it at the University of Calgary, which I have quite a lot of contact with, students in the nursing faculty do not want to go into long-term care. They really don't see it as a really end for them. And so, you know, we're forced into many other solutions as we go forward. And I think we can see the results really in the lack of faith that most of us, particularly seniors, have in our healthcare services. One of the ideas I came up with a long time back was the idea of getting an old transit bus and staffing it with nursing students. And they would literally go around the community, stay for a couple of days in different locations, and it would be a place where seniors could go and have a coffee. They could go and get their blood work done. They generally would find somewhere to hang out, because during the early days of COVID, you really didn't want to do anything like that. But it could be a place, again, it could be a navigation center. You know, why spend money on bricks and mortar when you could do it with a mobile system? Like we've now in our community, we've got dental services, we've got all manner of services, and even TELUS now is doing some really great work in that whole area. So we've got to rethink, we've got to be much more creative in how we deal with the challenges. And then we have got something new in Canada, and this is one of our local residential builders who's doing renovations, and the person who's running that has been part of developing across Canada a whole training program for residential contractors to actually learn how to do the job properly, how to relate better to seniors doing this work. It's still relatively expensive to have a full renovation done, but you certainly can have all the things that you need in the universal design done. And you have, at least now, you've got a build up of skilled contractors who know how to work with you. And then simple little things that the Calgary Resource Society is doing is simply, if you give them the name of somebody, one of your neighbors who's going through a tough time, they will deliver a little care package to that neighbor. It's a tangible way of showing that you care. Like on our street, we have a couple who, a very lively couple walking their dogs past our house, that the wife particularly was always very lively, very willing to talk on almost any topic. In 2 months, she went from being very healthy to dying. And we're hearing more and more cases like that. And how do you come alongside a couple while they're going through that problem, other than to let them know you care about them and you're willing to help them? How do we be compassionate to one another? Can I just turn my head the other way and pretend I didn't see or know that it was going on? I can't do that. And I'm sure many of you can't do that. But how do we open the conversation? And this is a simple way of doing it. And then Ron Bellino is again how I've met you guys tonight is through Ron Bellino, who I got I was put in contact with. He's a wonderful caregiver with HO Canada. And he started to share a lot of information about all the new long-term care standards. But this was one I was shown recently as a serious answer to long-term care that reconnected to the community. And I looked at it horrified. I just looked at it. It looked like there was a whole barrier. And I've got seniors in these really nondescript blocks, almost like a glue lab. I was horrified, and I look at the planning of it, and it just looks like another piece of really poor Calgary subdivision design. Maybe I was wrong, and I'd be willing to have somebody tell me I'm wrong, but I can't believe that we're still building crap like this for seniors. Sorry. So there are alternatives to long-term care as we know it, and Denmark has had a number of solutions to it. The problem for me is when I'm in conversations or in sessions where we've got people from Denmark and Scandinavian countries tell us how they do it, and then we ignore it, it's really, really frustrating. So essentially, they have developed processes where all of the facilities are small scale. Each municipality in Denmark has to provide housing for seniors and has to provide the healthcare services under one umbrella. We don't have this. We don't have a healthcare system completely devoid of the housing and senior side. I mean, we can have a situation here where a senior will fall over because of icy sidewalks, but the seniors department doesn't have to deal with the cost of it. Alberta Healthcare has to deal with the cost of it. So there's no accountability. So all the small scale facilities are just so badly needed. And we've got it happening elsewhere in the world. Why can't we at least start to explore how to do it? And these are things that we did run pre-COVID, a whole bunch of socialize and learn activities. At least we got the people that were capable of coming out to do that. And then we started to lay out some of the services that we needed for the seniors. We haven't got all of these taken care of yet, but this would allow seniors to age in place really well. And then things like the friendly check-in on a regular basis, the care posts, showing people that you're caring about them, even helping people. Like we now have a volunteer in our group who will actually take people's dogs for walks where they're not able to do it. Yeah, a whole bunch of things. Keeping us fit, doing pickleball. We're hopefully getting back into that in our community again. We did it for a time. I kind of enjoyed it. I didn't want to play competitively, but I just enjoyed batting and trying to keep myself fit. And then the diverse talents we've got amongst seniors, it's amazing the things that are going on in our community, people that have got skill sets that we can make really great use of, not just for the seniors, but even for the younger people in our community. So the care post was a rather nice idea that young people would actually send these handmade cards to seniors in their community. In this case, it was the Girl Guides made them up, but and then they were making them for people with a religious belief or non-religious belief, or just really to tell them that young people in the community cared about them. We've got to get more intergenerational stuff going on. And what we've started to do now, we've after COVID, we've reconnected in our community, and we've got a growing group of seniors. We're meeting on a regular basis. We meet every Wednesday for coffee. We've now got up to over 40 people are now involved, maybe 50 people. And we're finding it's serving a real need to bring people together, and it's rather nice because our community finally is showing a lot of support for us. In the beginning, for reasons that I can't fathom, didn't support what we were doing, but the last year they've been incredibly supportive. So we celebrate birthdays. Victoria here is from the Ukraine. She's one of our fairly new immigrants. George and Trudy on the left-hand side are our oldest Canadian friends. We've known them for 50 years. They're becoming quite frail. And so we've got a wide range of seniors in all levels of fitness and capability. And then we've got a group now that is actively walking. We walked this morning. I'm now finding I can walk even coming up to 85. I'm walking 5 to 6 kilometers in at least once a week. And I'm doing a lot of stuff on an exercise bike. And then last year we started to do a bunch of canoeing and kayaking. And I'm a long-time sailor. I did get a bunch of seniors out a few years ago with the Calgary City of Calgary Sailing School. Amazed that most people left the dock and got back to the dock. I think they were surprised. And this is me because I can't sail the city boats anymore. They're too dangerous for me to tack in. But now I found that the Disabled Sailing Association of Canada, of Alberta, actually has 6 specially designed boats for people like me now, where I can sit in a comfortable seat. I have to go out with a caregiver who's sort of an instructor as well, but I can do all the sailing. And so I haven't had to give up something I really love. And in fact, the last sail I did last winter, a guy in a wheelchair was coming down the ramp with his joystick control in his wheelchair. He draws up alongside the boat, they hoist him into the boat, and he's got a joystick in the boat. So there's 6 boats like this we've got access to, and even if you've never sailed before, and I've got 3 seniors wanting to start from scratch, it's pretty exciting. So I then asked myself, what about the frail and the disabled? What about those without transportation? And all of these questions I'm asking. In our case, we don't have a family nearby to help. We do have a family, they're in Vancouver. Most of our family is still in Britain. What about those with limited resources, those that are confined to the house, and so on? What about the caregivers? The amount of volunteer hours that caregivers give in Canada is amazing. It runs into almost hundreds of thousands of hours of of giving and looking after people in their community. And many of them end up being burnt out, and it's really quite a worry. And then really one of the challenges we've got is many communities do not have, probably the majority of communities do not have an effective community association. Our one has suddenly come alive because my wife and I put on a Christmas show in December, and they actually were amazed, I think, to find we got nearly 50 people turned out to it. And it's given them confidence. Now, every month we've got a major social activity. We had beer tasting, we had wine tasting. We've got a community dance where 200 of the 300 tickets are already sold. It's almost, we're getting sellout. And it just needed the community to have confidence that apart from renting the building out to all manner of different users, it could actually provide a social centre. Even so, we only have 350 members out of a possible 2,500. So there's got to be ways of encouraging community associations to do a much better job and giving them encouragement and incentives and give them maybe know-how. So one of the groups I just got to know through my connections and was Burlington in Eastern Canada. Is really starting to do, they're starting to look at that diagram there is really probably a senior care facility, small scale facility, and then different kinds of facility. And then on the outside of it would be normal single family or duplex accommodation, but it's all linked to a common purpose. And so it's a properly planned community, and they're doing some wonderful things. They've been learning from their American neighbors to the south, who have been very strong, rather like our village to village network group. And I'm now having meetings with and in fact, the guy that's a major player in it is actually a councillor in the Burlington Council. So we're seeing the city of Burlington is really leaping ahead and giving us a lot of know-how in Canada, how to do it. And they've actually come up with a manifesto, which I really like, because I think most of us see just sit back and allow it to all happen. We almost say, what difference will it make if I do something? Well, the Burlington people have come up with the number of issues there. It's a declaration. And I think it's time for us to start to making our voices heard. We're taxpayers. We're sitting there and we're letting the municipality get away, and the government at all levels get away with treating us really quite badly. So this is the project in Inglewood. I'm going to try and play the video here, which I just helped. This has been going on for 5 years. It's just 16 units. I helped with the original design, but it's taken 5 years to get to the stage. The city's kept on asking for redevelopment applications. And anyway, let me see if I can actually pull this up.
Barry, I think at the moment you're sharing the PowerPoint, so you're going to have to stop the share if you want us to hear the audio from the video, and you're going to have to reshare the window with just the video on it.
I think probably the answer maybe is we should maybe pause anyway, and maybe allow some questions and interaction, because I think there are probably people in here who have got some thoughts on this whole question of universal design, which I'd like to hear some input, to be honest. I'm happy to go later if there's time. I can go into the second part of the presentation, which is all the virtual reality stuff, but I don't want to preclude people having input into what is going on.
What do you say, Ross?
Yeah, we can go for questions right now. We're getting close to the normal top of the hour, but we can go into overtime here if we want as well. Brent, you've got a question there?
Hi, Barry. I'm just curious, you mentioned changing needs, and that your input on, there was a housing facility that I don't think that went forward, and one of the reasons they posed was the financial side of it. So if your finances change over time, do you think rent versus own becomes a decision point for those that are aging?
I think if we had these services, like in Denmark, for instance, seniors are allowed up to 7 hours of time per day. We're lucky if we get a month where that would happen, even if you can find out what kind of palliative services are available. So we can keep people in their existing homes because most of us own our homes, so that the owning now maintenance is an issue. We're facing some maintenance issues that we're tending to put off because the house is still comfortable. It's still enjoyable to be in it, and most seniors would prefer to stay in their homes if they can. But again, maybe there are different solutions, rather like that University of Calgary design of the laneway suites, where we possibly ultimately move into that. And then, of course, the challenge that, as we're seeing, a number of seniors now are facing that reality of losing a partner, that the partner is dying, and so we're left on our own. So that probably precipitates a change of some kind. So yeah, there are a number of factors, but the best solution, the most economical solution for everybody, is to keep people in their homes. So, I mean, I would like to replace all our windows in our house, but at the moment I'm tending to think, no, I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I mean, we'd love to explore other ways of doing things, and but it's a navigation of all the complexity. I mean, in a way, Brent, getting to know you through the guys that I meet every Friday with, it's been amazing, opening a whole bunch of doors, which like the meeting you held the other day was just with Lee was just so rewarding to find there's some amazing technology and interest going on right in our back door. Yeah.
Keith, you got a question there, Saul?
Kind of a comment early on in the presentation. You're talking about the social interaction and how much that's pivotal into ensuring the longevity of seniors. And I would say that seniors are dying of loneliness is a fair comment. Considering how stuck we are in this society on the things that are fiscal,
yep,
do you feel like, is it something that we can address within a generation, that social interaction, the building of the village, along with the fiscal, or does it really need to be a two-pronged approach, or even more prongs than that, to say, policymakers, you really need to sit up and take notice and grab some balls and actually do this work?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm encouraged that Burlington finally is giving me some heart, that there's a municipality that's beginning to do it, and they've got the people alongside them, healthcare professionals. They've got people that understand the whole economic side of stuff, and it's, we wanted to be the first village in Canada. We didn't quite make it, but at least we're seeing other people. So I mean, tomorrow I'm meeting with somebody who's very involved with senior activities in the city and in the province, and is connected with funding possibilities as well. So we've got the capability, I think, of raising funds to do stuff. We just need to have some encouragement that we're on the right course. I mean, better to make I was going to address even the whole issue of co-housing. Why is it Calgary, or really I think Alberta, only has one or two co-housing projects? The one that was going to be built in Bowness, rather sadly, good friends John and Jocelyn Mungham have sadly had to pull out of it, and it really is terrible to watch what has happened to them as a couple.
Yeah, John was very, very excited about that. I've been trying to work age-in-place stuff from the community perspective for quite some time.
Yeah.
I'm going to reach out to you on LinkedIn. There's further conversation. I'm not going to keep Ross dragging on too long. I'm sure we've met also, Barry, just as an aside.
Your face is familiar, and no, let's do that, because I think we've got to have mass. We've got to have
absolutely.
People. As you say, the Calgary Resource Society's place in Oak Ridge got kind of edged out when nobody, and that's what's happening. Things disappear,
and aren't replaced.
Yeah, we've got to be much more vocal, and respectfully vocal, but we've got to be vocal. We've got to, and I think we're coming up to an election where we've got to show that we can't just be bought off by money. We've got to be bought off by promise of services.
Legitimate, functional stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah,
I think
Thanks, Barry.
The other thing I would say is the Denmark doesn't provide anything on a cheaper level than Canada. The cost is roughly the same. It's just their dollars, or their whatever they have, their kronas or whatever, are better spent. They're better spent. There's more accountability. There's more making sure the dollars get spent properly. And in Canada, it's all over the place.
And then understanding that the deliverables are important. And I think this is quite oftentimes what we get stuck with, especially in our provincial constructs, is the criticisms come about from how much are you spending, not the value of what the deliverable is, it's how much did that cost, which is why the South Calgary Resource Center, whatever it was there, got cut, is they couldn't afford to keep it going. It's too disappointing because that was what was required, is required, will still be required, and yet it was a line item and removed because it was a line item.
No, well, I would look forward to sort of more dialogue, and I'm certainly intending to. I'm talking to that councillor on Thursday. He's been willing to come back and say that he wants to carry on the conversation, and I want to be fully. I'd like to have 100 of us in Calgary who are willing to listen to him, because he understands all the parameters. Yeah.
Juan, you got a question there next?
Hi, yes, nice to meet you all. My question is I guess more about the, logistics of the concept of the village and that 15-minute city that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about that, but at the same time we're talking about aging in place. So how do the two things relate to each other? Are we planning on making those villages or 15-minute cities or type of infrastructure for people to move into when they're younger so that they can age there? Or are we planning on moving, because if we're planning on moving seniors to those facilities, then, or to those types of concepts, then they're not aging in place anymore because we're moving them there. But if we fill them with young people in order to have them age in place in that setup, then there's no room for the old people that actually need it. So I would just want to know more about how that works.
Yeah, what I can share with Ross, actually, a lecture I did for Mount Royal University 3 years ago, and it really describes what we're trying to do relative to the village and how the villages started in the US. Basically, it was a couple. In Boston they have heavy snowfall, and so every year, and I had to do it this year, not quite as dramatically, but the husband was actually on the roof with an axe, chopping off the ice and snow and everything from the roof. There was a line over the ridge of the roof, and his wife had to hold on to the line. When he got down, she said, "This is nuts. We're not going to carry on like this." And that's how the first village was formed. It was basically, if you can imagine, you make a village out of a piece of suburbia. All the characteristics of the village can operate, and the Americans have proved, that it can be done. There's nearly 300 villages that they have made operational. So you stay in your existing house, you just provide all the services that are required to keep you in that existing house you're in now. It doesn't mean you can't downsize, perhaps. And hopefully, one of the other projects I wanted to share was the co-op is redeveloping in Oak Ridge, and they've done a really poor job of designing it as a place for many of us to downsize into. They're going to be building apartments with no clue as to how they could be used by seniors in the community. So it's almost like, City Hall, I'm sorry, I've got to be critical. City Hall aging in place has really not done a particularly good job. Maybe they don't have the resources, but certainly you're welcome to listen to that lecture, because it tried to describe how we were going to do it in Calgary. And we ran into some opposition, unfortunately, but we're back building it again. And we're trying to build, on the one hand, we're trying to have the social group coming together on regular occasions, but also we're trying to come alongside the people that can't come out. We've got couples that are, I've got one couple where the husband has got medical conditions where he can't be too far from a bathroom, very practical consideration, but he's now worried that his wife has got early onset of dementia. Now, I can't just ignore trying to come alongside them. It just means a phone call to them. But yeah, we can do it, even though we're still auto-dependent in our community. But nevertheless, we can start. I mean, I don't see it's impossible to actually buy up a couple of homes in a number of nodes in the community and turn them into a gathering spot on the ground level and apartments on the top, mainly for single females, because the sad truth is that women outlive the men. That seems to be a reality. So I think we could do some very creative things, but let's start to have a bit more ability to rethink zoning and issues like that. We can't be held rigid by the rigid zoning constraints.
Okay, so from what I'm gathering here, the concept is more about bringing services closer to communities, like the way you have you always have a school less than 15 minutes away from your home. You're saying there should also be a clinic and a store and a park and etc. always 15 minutes from your home, regardless of where your home is. Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, in any new community, that should happen. My early days as an architect in Britain, I was a young architect in developing a new town in not far from London. It was to house the people bombed in World War II. And we didn't have a municipality. We were charged as a corporation to literally build homes as fast as we could. So we didn't have all the constraints that we have when you have to do a project here. The corporation had the ability to just go ahead and do it. And so as a young architect, I was designing stuff that we were building literally within less than a year. And we could do that, but we've got to have a system that rewards that. And you know, if we make a few mistakes, like watching, you know, John and Jocelyn Mungham give up because they just were literally, you know, caused incredible distress to give up a dream that had all the chances if they were supported. We should have more co-housing. The project in Inglewood, there should be hundreds of that scale of project. We shouldn't be building any more mega long-term care facilities. There should be a moratorium on building any more of them. So.
Yeah, well, my sister-in-law lives in a building that I believe I think it's like maybe 7 or 8 stories high, and I think the first 2 are like senior living and has like a gym and a community service and all that stuff. Yeah. And then all the apartments above that are just regular rentals for like anybody, and they still get access to the gym and to all the facilities, and they get to interact with the seniors just as much as the seniors interact with each other.
That's a perfect solution, because the other project, which is quite commonly known as called the Greenhouse Project, again, mainly from the States, but that's rather like the Inglewood project, a small scale. But some of the greenhouse projects are actually part of an apartment block, rather like that project I showed you that we did with the unusual section through the building. That actually had 2 group homes in it. And they were just on different floors. So you can do that. You just got to be more creative. And you know, a condition of planning approval is the developer, makes it happen. We've got to be much more demanding on what developers put up, to be honest. And people like Canada Housing and Mortgage, they also need to play a much more responsible role. It used to be very easy for me as an architect to go to Canada Mortgage and actually agree a project ahead of building, and I could be guaranteed funding, you know, within, say, less than a year. I wouldn't have to hang around for 5 years like the Shirley Ann Rubin in Inglewood has had to wait. We've just got too many players trying to do too many things. Yeah.
Yeah, Brent,
on your last part, Barry, I think Canada Mortgage and Housing had a recent session that I attended, and there's 42 different names for laneway suite, granny suite, so on across Canada. And one of the things is there was a wedge opportunity to equalize that zoning again across Canada, in the hopes that communities wouldn't be able to restrict that. There's some hope to do that from coast to coast.
Yeah, sadly, keyword restrict rather than try to incorporate into current community and build form and figure out how it works best for everyone, rather than how do we make sure that we don't have one of these types of suites. Elizabeth, who Barry was talking about a little earlier, she is now fielding the complete spectrum of acceptance to utter rejection for the suite that she has in her backyard. There are people who are yelling and screaming at her, all the way people ringing her doorbell to say just how much they love it. So it's super controversial is the wrong word, but I mean, it's making people think for sure.
Yeah. Thank goodness for people like Elizabeth who had the resources to do it and show that it can be done. And she's a strong lady. And but we shouldn't have. I mean, it's rather like the Sheriff King home that was first proposed for Elbow Park, and of course Elbow Park said, "Oh, we've got no women in our community that are abused." And so it ended up in Inglewood, and that was when Ralph Klein was at City Hall, and also they had a lot of kickback from Inglewood in one meeting. But Rose Calababa, his assistant, halfway through the meeting, she said, "Guys, are you saying that we don't have people that need a facility like this?" And it's almost like the meeting completely turned round. We need champions, and rather like that project we did with the different cross section. Again, Canadian Mental Health, I'm trying to think of his name, the guy that led it at the time. He did the same thing. He spoke to the community when they were getting difficult and said, 1 in 3 of us in this room have had some kind of mental health challenge that we've needed help for. And we'd be crazy if we tended to believe or tried to make others believe that we didn't go through these problems. You know, I'm afraid I certainly had need for some kind of help, counseling help in different parts of my life. And but again, it's having champions who are willing to get up and say, you know, support, I mean, better to make some mistakes than to go on. It's rather like, in some ways, every time I see school areas, like we spoke about schools earlier on, that they should be the centerpiece of the community. We now have a gifted school that 15 school buses turn up to every day. It's no longer a community school. And the community building and the community association building don't have any connection anymore. They should be one use. So, yeah.
Payton, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, Peyton, something like
sorry.
that. Yeah. You're good. Yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to call back to the slide that you were showing where there was like all the different resources that were available. Just like a smorgasbord or whatever, filled up slide or whatever. And I guess, well, my question is has there been any initiatives to use AI in kind of helping bring those resources together and create like a simpler way for people to interface with them?
I don't think so. And I think probably we might scare people with saying AI would be the solution. I mean, I've found enough challenges trying to persuade people that putting a helmet on is not a bad thing to do because it connects you in a different kind of way. So I'm willing to try anything. I mean, I think we've got models you know, from other countries where it's working. It's just that there's too many people think they have a solution, and it just causes confusion. I know with my entering into the world of potentially having Parkinson's, which I'm now convinced I don't, but I mean, trying to find neurologists to actually see you, and it's only recently where I actually had a proper physical with testing my cognitive, my mental capacity and everything else, and I had tuning forks on, it seemed like every part of my body. But I'm convinced now that I for 3 years, I've been taking meds that I didn't need to take. And so I think that's the confusion you've got. I mean, how many times do you have the feeling your doctor, who's very much a generalist, does he really know that much about Parkinson's or dementia or issues like that? I don't know whether AI would help him or not. I'm just not too certain.
I have seen some word of AI being used to try and help direct and leverage, but
Yeah.
AI is kind of in this in-between state right now too, where you need to have the correct information, the correct guardrails, otherwise it will provide false information and hallucinate incorrect information. And that's such a high risk, especially with these sorts of categories, that
Totally.
there might be investigations into it at the moment, but it being an actual end-to-end solution, I don't think is going to happen for any industry in particular anytime soon.
Yeah.
I do think that from the AI perspective, and I don't know that Ross knows me to not be a tech guy. I'm not a tech guy, but the food bank, Calgary Food Bank, has a really good system. It's not AI based, but it's a really good system to try and keep people from continually using the process of getting food. The problem isn't that they need food. The problem is that they need something to keep them employed with money, et cetera, et cetera. So they are in touch with so many different organizations, and they've got a system on how it works. I would say they would probably be apt to run a pilot to AI that thing, and that thing would very easily overlap into the senior structure. Because like Barry and like you're saying, Peyton, there are so many facilities when I was trying, and so many organizations when I was trying to do that work for the community association. I was blown away and wondering, where do I start from my own community's seniors? I have no idea.
And I think that's a good area where AI could be, where it's just recommending you the directions to go. It's not giving you necessarily the packaged up solution. If we had
Yeah.
a specific system that had even just a general description of each of the organizations and a major list of the resources that they help with, then it could even pair and find the associations to give you like, okay, these are the 3 top options to go and talk to within the city.
No, I think that does have some merit, because it seems that everybody who, like again, the one couple that we've got now who are now, they've downsized already, and now they're having to find somewhere for more care, but they're having to go out themselves to literally research what facilities exist. And like the lady friend who's now looking for hospices, she's having to go out and literally visit every one of them, and not one of them can she say I'm delighted by, because they're they're old fashioned, they're slightly grim in terms of the staff do a magnificent job, but we shouldn't have to be hunting for stuff.
Yeah, and it's
Well,
not
I-
based
yeah.
on the social or the care. It's based on money primarily.
Yeah.
Not care based.
Yeah, that's it. No, you sum it up well.
The finance
Yeah.
is the focus first, which is then hindering it, because if you focus on the care being it, then you're creating the scale and creating the capacity where it becomes optimized. Whereas if you're looking at it from a financial standpoint, even from the outset, you're not able to reach or support or manage that sort of nexus point and realizing the true value of that care, which
Yeah.
is more than the financial value that's initially being put in.
I mean, I'd like to see more experimental work in, like we did a lot of zero lot line stuff way back, or not a lot, but we did enough that we were allowed to experiment. We need to free up the. I mean, I'm pretty certain it's still the same case in the UK, where when we were designing in a housing area, I would design everything, including the drains. I didn't need engineers to tell me the drains go downhill, or that we needed stations and so on, and. We were able to build in accordance with an approved plan, but we didn't have to have this nonsense with the pins that we have to put in. We have to spend nearly $3,000 to put the pins in around a lot. Why do we do that? If we were within 4 or 5 inches of the planning approval, why does it matter? Let's build the fence in the proper place, perhaps as accurately as we can, but let's cut a lot of the unnecessary complexity, the engineering complexity. Because really, and I used to be part of the land development industry because I got a lot of my work through that, but I was never a willing person to seeing how the land developers have grabbed control. I mean, for goodness sake, let's have some chance to do the co-housing. Let's do some of the experimental stuff, because we've got enough examples that we can copy from and build from.
Noticed a question and comment in chat there talking about Radburn planning housing, Varsity Village. The person in chat's just mentioning that didn't turn out so good. I'm not aware of the details with that specific one. If you wanted to chime in,
I mean, certainly the new town that we worked in, most of the communities had a sort of Radburn where you had pedestrian access. You could actually walk to the schools, walk to the shopping, the medical, the groceries, and places like that, independent of a road system.
the person in comment mentioned that that ended up not so good in that
Yeah,
situation.
I think
In what way?
I think it's been. Yeah, no, that would be good to have the comments. Yeah.
Yeah, in which way did you mean, Vinci? If you want to put in chat or mention it, just which way did that not turn out so good?
I guess while they're answering or whatever,
Mhm.
Another question I kind of had was, you're talking about the like zoning stuff where there's like the like little micro malls or whatever, and there's no housing above it.
Yep.
Is that because of like city policy and stuff like that, or
I-
what's preventing people from putting houses on top of
Yeah, I mean,
those areas?
in Vancouver, it's rare to have a commercial property that doesn't have housing or something above it.
It's
Why
just
Okay.
that area is zoned for commercial, so it's
Yeah.
zoned so that it doesn't necessarily have that residential on top. And there's a lot of special zoning permits to try and make those sorts of developments in Calgary now. But there's like Barry's mentioning, there's land use and policy that is made, and there's so many exceptions that are being made to the rules right now, instead of the whole land use being looked at from top bottom from a different perspective. And this is a problem across North America, where each city makes its own land use bylaws and its own specifics, and there's inconsistencies between one city and another, and it ends up just compounding back in on itself. Like Toronto has a systemic issue where it's either single family housing or high density housing, and there's no middle housing whatsoever. Like, we actually have more here in Calgary than over there, but yet, like, we still have to advocate for more to be able to do it.
Damn Skippy.
Well, one of the other issues is we were able to build our own houses twice. I mean, I was a contractor. I obviously knew a little bit about the construction, but we had self-build groups in the UK, which were really successful. Why couldn't we give a piece of the land in every subdivision to young people who go in and they're willing to spend a year working with maybe tradespeople, give them a chance to put sweat equity into it. I mean, I was working a job in London at the same time I was building a house, digging drains and doing all sorts of things, which I could do when I was in my mid-20s. Let's give young people a chance to put the sweat equity and be able to afford something, and maybe houses are designed in modules so that the first part is a small livable unit, and then the thing is designed to add components to it.
Yeah, there's the cases of modular housing where it's like there's entire walls and pieces that move around, and as people move in and out of the house, you can turn one unit into three, or turn three units, or turn 3 units back into one, move rooms in and around. There's ways to be able to do it.
Yeah.
The wrapper plan person mentioned in chat that in their example, there was a lot of criminal activity in their, I guess, specifically in Varsity in Calgary. I don't know specifically what the stats on that.
Yeah, not knowing the specifics, I would wager a guess that a lot of the build form probably didn't lend anything at all to trying to eliminate the anonymity to its space. There was probably not great lighting, very little eyes on. There was probably a great effort to ensure that homes couldn't see directly into one another's yards and so on. I mean, from a design element, this is where Barry needs to preach. From a design element, that is a lot of where some of these designs where they try to be tight and they try to be cozy at the same time, but it becomes so anonymous that any criminal element can walk in there, be completely hidden to most people, and do whatever it is they please. If you have people who are in their community and they have their eyes on, your example, Barry, with the photo that here's the street and there's no persons on it, that's a great place to do crime, because it's there's nobody watching you. There's nobody at the door. And Juan, you talk about a 15-minute city. A 15-minute city just indicates that there's enough amenity that you can get around easily and quickly without having to go too far, without having to get in a car. That lends well to keeping everybody's eyes on. Most, like these smaller European villages, often have this element all the time. There's a central something. Sometimes it's used for a school, sometimes it's a city hall. A lot of times it goes through phases in order to accommodate the current social demographic. And that's, and speaking out of turn here, sorry, Barry, but I mean, that's the kind of thing where we, and when we start to embrace this type of thought process, it brings the village back.
Yeah, no, I obviously, yeah. I mean, when you think of the traditional walk-up units in many cities, which literally they're almost right by the sidewalk, but they're half a level up. And so you actually, privacy is a lot better than it is with one of the 20-foot setbacks that we have in most subdivisions now. I mean, that front yard doesn't do any good whatsoever. I mean, we're filling it with plants which really are not natural to this environment. You know, we're trying to make our pretty gardens for 3 or 4 months of the year, and really we're trying to do things which are not natural to this environment. I mean, that's the other thing I find is when you travel to somewhere like Greece, you go to every island, every type of design and housing is quite unique to that island. And we've never developed anything that vaguely looks like a Canadian design. I mean, I think Vancouver, maybe, or BC, some of the woodsy stuff that we saw way back was more akin to a style which felt suitable for the BC environment. But generally, you can't tell where you are in Canada by the housing design, which I think is a pity that we can't have that uniqueness to something. And I think it's just the way that we do it. We sell land to, or developers amalgamate huge pieces of land, and then the way they work through builders, it's not really friendly to the end user. You've got to accept one of 5 or 6 plans, and that's why I'd love to try all the other ideas of letting people do some sweat equity. That's a good discussion. Maybe we need some design competitions.
Design competitions, design pilots.
Yeah, and the design, it wouldn't only be physical; it would be how do you do the social side.
One project I was working on, we were working with emergency people coming up from southern United States and Florida into New York State. And a lot of it was talking about testing out different sorts of community designs, specifically with these groups that are being moved, like taking in basically modular housing, finding areas to just build and try different designs and try to move the community, focusing on the community development first, and making it that localized community and making it modular to maybe move things around, but then really finding a design that works in that region for those people. Or even in specific regions and towns, and it might work differently in different areas of the city, but still works best when you do focus around that, like, well, the 15-minute city, making sure you're keeping people in the community. I wanted to actually jump off of one of the flip sides, and I don't know if anyone else finds this with perception, but I find some people, when they perceive a busy street, they see it as an unsafe street, and there's like that flip in perception where some people see it the other way. I don't know if anyone else can like speak to that experience. Like some people see a quiet street as a safe street.
Which part of the busyness?
As being a North American that goes over to Hong Kong one time, where the sidewalk is full of people moving.
Yeah,
that's an unreal environment, right? When you're not used to that kind of density.
My street's very busy with cars going 60 and 70 kilometers an hour. So I deem that to be unsafe.
That's getting into vehicular.
But it's busy.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't disagree. You take a look at the street designs in a lot of different places, and I feel safer in a place where people can see around themselves very well, that there's not a lot of pockets where even if it's a shared street where there are cars, that you're not invisible to others. As much as Toronto's trying to do some good stuff, the social interaction in Toronto, they have fear of looking at one another. It's one thing that's at least hasn't totally been lost in Calgary, is that when you're in a busier space, you can make eye contact with someone and they're not immediately thinking that you need to murder them or they need to murder you. But safe, that's an interesting concept.
I think it's all about balance, like everything else in the world. If not to go to either extreme. If it's too quiet, it's not safe. But if it's too busy, it's also not safe. So you need to find that middle ground where it's basically, it's not empty, but it's also not completely full. There's there's people coming and going. Every time you're walking down the street, there is at least 2 or 3 more people also walking down the street in either direction, that you can see from where you are. Oh, there is other people walking here, but they're not right next to me or right in front of me or obstructing my way or anything like that. There's enough people that if something happens, they're there to not only see what happened, but to offer a hand in the situation. But at the same time, it's not overwhelming with people.
That's a great takeaway. It's trying to boil down what makes whatever it is that you're looking for, and trying to be scientific about your method and proving the positive and the negative. Like, prove both sides, and then try to do the takeaway that you can say, this is in fact why this space is whatever it is you're looking for. Safe, not safe, speedy, dense, anything like that. It's being open-minded enough to see what in fact is going on without going in with a predetermined notion of what you expect to see as an outcome.
We did a bit of the compare and the contrast, and I wanted to do Calgary versus Vancouver. And I know Calgary was always characterized downtown as being a very downtown busy during the day, downtown empty at whatever finish time. Whereas Vancouver, to Barry's point, is like really tried to do that mixed thing. So you have apartments and commercial and office space per building, such that you always 24 hours a day kind of thing. You always had some traffic. So it's just a little bit of a difference in their design right from the start.
Now, and that showed during COVID, where it was just so quiet downtown because there wasn't even the stuff in the daytime at that point. And now we're finally starting to see some mixed use residential being put in and being discussed, but it just was never a focus before because it was so corporate office heavy focused.
So maybe that's a positive part of what is happening downtown, that we'll have a lot more housing, which you couldn't get any other way than something dramatic happening. So, yeah. I
think you're seeing that. I mean, Calgary hit it because our oil price hit very early, 2016, 2017 again, but San Francisco, New York, and that as our downtown vacancy rates hit into the teens and even into the 20s, they're really trying to do that repurpose of office buildings, if possible, into residential, right?
It speaks a lot also to how the market would be able to react and be able to give enough units for availability to affect the price point so that people could afford homes. I mean, that's something that just destroys us here, especially in Calgary, that because we don't have any sort of governmental direction to try to improve the quantity of available housing units, that the pricing stays the way it is. And it makes like real estate people happy, developers happy. You can't get young people to move into Calgary to help fill up those lower ranks in the social demographic. They just simply can't afford it. It's just not possible. Maybe those units downtown might help change that.
I think I saw some protests even this week because there's almost a monopolization of a lot of the rental spaces when it comes to apartment buildings and management in the city. Like, I have a lot of friends who were in apartment buildings that were just managed by local people who were independent, and then the buildings just get bought up by the large companies, rent doubles, and nobody's able to rent out in those areas anymore.
It's a shame.
And I think too, it's volume of housing, but we also still need to have like enough affordable housing initiatives so that we can have that variety within the city one way or another. Like, you do need the volume of housing, but it needs to be the right type of volume of housing in the right locations.
I had to give kudos to the city for that. My perspective on affordable housing is 99 times out of 100. It's a project where a developer is taking some money so that they can create a substandard product and flood the market with that. And it's not even flooded because there's usually some sub clause that they're allowed to resell it at normal pricing in X time. So when our city turned around and said that they are wanting to provide the persons who need rent money with money, I thought, okay, well that's the appropriate offset. That is addressing the affordability of the housing. It doesn't affect the market in and of itself, but it's definitely helping out. Unfortunately, not enough people, but it's helping out some.
That's I guess there's so many different types of affordable housing too, because what you're talking about is the affordable housing where there's a certain amount of money put up and they're having to rent it out at that rate for a specific period of time in the contractual agreement, right?
Right.
Whereas there's also the other flip side of affordable housing in other countries where it's just literally government owned and operated housing, which is then sold to people at a nominal rate which they can afford and manage, and there's enough of it distributed throughout the city. Like there's the case of certain cities, I forget the city off the top of my head, but there's a couple cities in the Asian region where like 90% of the city is all just government owned and operated housing because it's sufficient enough for everybody's needs. It's small apartments that manage for what they need it to be, and it doesn't need to be necessarily extravagant, and that also decreases any sort of class differential that occurs at the time.
Yeah, and very typical of humans in their greed, where you, like a rent control district by definition is not a bad idea. It's unfortunately owned by somebody who doesn't give a shit about the people who live there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the care and compassion that's lacking in it, and it again comes down to only focusing on that bottom line.
Yeah. Barry, do you have more for us, Barry?
And I mean, I think that's probably enough. There's, I mean,
yeah, although there's the whole, we could probably save the rest of that slide deck for a secondary one at a later point in time, either later in the fall.
I've enjoyed this because I don't often get a chance to talk about some of this stuff. I spend more time talking about the VR stuff, and I do care a lot about community design and particularly looking after seniors. I mean, we've still got 1,000 seniors in Oak Ridge that we really don't know about, and many of them will probably hide behind doors. And yeah, we've got just got to find a way to. I mean, it's terrible to say it. We use a word like evangelize. What can be done when we work together as opposed to hiding from each other.
I'll give you a notion with some other people that I work with on other things. Sustainable Calgary, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about that. So the notion is, in the past anyway, we've always been people who want to play nice in the sandbox, try to placate as much as possible and having the conversations. What we have found over time, after having done this for far too long, that the city is all about managing expectation. And if we're in the same mindset that we wish to placate the people who are managing the expectation, then nothing's accomplished. So we have to continue to press expectation. And like you mentioned, Barry, it's not to be rude about it, but standing fast with an idea set that is perhaps not embraced at this moment, but you know that it's good form, is a good way to be thinking, and trying to encourage our policymakers to recognize that, you know, this is important stuff. We're not going to hold our breath and stamp our feet, but we're going to still be here creating the conversations and hoping, as you said, perhaps being evangelical about it, that we're going to keep having these conversations. We have to keep having these conversations because we're not in a sustainable model in the way the Calgary's built now. I can't see it lasting.
No. Well, I think the fact that when I went to the budget hearing, and in fact, when the Oak Ridge Co-op project was being approved, I was the only one in the council chamber from Oak Ridge. There were two of us, one guy from Bayview who was opposed to it. I wasn't opposed to it. And it was really quite nice because we didn't get on until 9 o'clock at night. And I felt like I had the council in my living room. We actually had a really great conversation about what could have been done. And it's people are either frightened or they don't think they're going to be heard. I don't know what it is. I prefer to have a conversation as opposed to having to force something over 5 minutes. So it's got to be a better process than that.
And bringing voice to the people who are willing to say, yeah, that's okay. Because the people who show up to council and committee presently are people who are diametrically opposed to whatever's going on. They're either very for or very against. Absolutely. And we don't have a voice of people who are like, yeah, that's okay. That's fine. You know, you want to build that? That's great. You know, and that is that missing middle conversation for people. I mean, not the build forum, for people, that 1/3 of folk who are not necessarily advocate, they're not against, but they're not going to stand steadfastly against something, but they'd have no voice.
Yeah.
How do we mobilize those people?
No, I agree.
Need to mobilize the NIMBYs to go up against all the NIMBYs.
Yeah, how do we do that? That's a good. Give us a
Well,
game plan. Figure out
Mhm.
how that works.
when we applied for our secondary suite, that was before the city had approved it globally across the city. It was only probably 6 months before. We had a secret petition of 29 signatures of our neighbors. Yes, Nenshi, when I went up to defend it, because there was nobody, not one of our neighbors there to oppose me, but he was laughing when he said, there appears to be a little bit of opposition. And I said, yes. Oh, I mean, that's people couldn't come and say they were opposed to it to my face, because they would make a claim that that secondary suite was going to take away value from their houses. Well, and that all renters are bad people. Well, we've got renters on our street. They're decent people.
Mm-hmm. There was a community leader in Mission, Rick Wilson was his name, and he really revamped the community association model with that premise, because most of the people in Mission are renters.
Yeah.
And how do you create community with this renter community?
Yeah.
And he did a fantastic job, because he didn't make the community association about how to resonate about being NIMBY about something. It was how to resonate about being positive about the fact that you're all in the same neighborhood.
Absolutely.
You are community, in fact, regardless of what people are going to say, whether you're a renter or an owner, you're community.
I actually, part of my presentation, and I can share it with Russ, it was all about making a better use of community associations, giving them enough rewards and incentives to do a really good job, not to just rent the building.
Mm-hmm.
If their only job is to act as a renter, that's where our community was failing. Now it's finally realizing it can do stuff that's beneficial to the community, and they're getting people turning up. I mean, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
Ross will have a chuckle at this. I'm actually back at the community association, Ross. So there's people who wonder, like, what is wrong with you? But it is definitely a point that we need to continue to keep people resonating. And there's stuff that's important, and there's stuff that's made to be political.
Mhm.
And then the sad thing is that people, when they feel that fear that it's going to be politicized, that they're going to be made to look dumb, then they're not willing to stand up for it. And if they are given an opportunity to be able to have a conversation about it, ask questions, and not made to be felt like they're an outsider, to make me feel that they're unintelligent in the conversation, I think we're going to get a lot further along in our communities if we give people those kinds of opportunities.
Well, I mean, over my architectural career, I handled all manner of, trying to house people with a mental, come out of Panoka. I even had a situation of a small project where muscular dystrophy children were being wheeled in wheelchairs. The neighbors didn't like it. But, I wasn't willing to walk away and just accept that. My very first project with Alberta Housing was the rhubarb patch in Inglewood, where I had all manner of bay windows and corners. They fought bitterly to take those out, because they said corners cost money, corners collect garbage. Those people that have lived in that facility for nearly 50 years, they enjoy the corners, they enjoy the different views, and it didn't cost a lot more money to provide them.
That was you. Cool.
Yeah. We need to carry on this conversation.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say we're at the a little after the 8:30 mark. I'm at it for an hour and a half. I think I'm gonna close off the formal recording. So thank you for those of you who were able to join us in the recording there. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to seeing you again next time. And then we'll just go into our after hours discussion here.
Yeah, and Barry, I've put in the chat there my email address directly to you, because LinkedIn would like me to be premium in order to connect with you that way. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there if you want to reach out there, or just send me an email.
Okay.
I need to get back into the aging in place conversation with some of the folks at City and otherwise.